Good morning, Mr. Brown. You're looking good for your age. Thank you, Paddington. Hang on. How old do you think I am? 80. 80! At least. Well, I'm having a midlife crisis at the moment, so I suppose I'm somewhere between 40 and 50. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check that. Hang on. How come you can't remember how old you are? I told you why. It's because I'm having a midlife crisis. Okay, that makes sense. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my review of Paddington 2, the absolutely huge box office #1 critically acclaimed sequel to the hit British family film from 2014, Paddington. And yeah, this film is a critically acclaimed, and apparently it was at least a few weeks ago, #1 at the British box office. And I can safely say, yes, this film is a little bit better than the first one. The first one was brilliant. I didn't see it in 2014, but I did see it in cinemas in January 2016, and that's why that was reviewed and why it's on the 2016 ranking list. It came 5th, just behind Zootropolis, Rogue One, Conjuring 2, and Deadpool at 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, respectively. Paddington 2, I think, is slightly better than the first one, similar to how I think Kingsman: The Golden Circle is a slight improvement on Kingsman: The Secret Service. Maybe it's not as good. It's not as much of an improvement on Paddington 1 as the Kingsman sequel is to the first one. However, I would say Paddington 2 is slightly better than Kingsman 2. Similar to how I would say Kingsman 1 is not quite as good as Paddington 1. And on a similar level, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a little bit better than its first one, but I think, but a bit more than these two. But yeah, Paddington 2, great film, and one thing I love about this film is, again, I saw the first one again not too long ago, seen it 3 times, twice on telly and once at the cinema. Wouldn't be surprised if I saw it on DVD at some point in the not too distant future. And one thing I love about the second film, compared to the first film, is that now we've been introduced to these characters, a bit similar to how with Guardians and Kingsman, and as well as other franchises. We've gotten introduced to these characters, and we want to see what happens next with them, and what we see doesn't disappoint. And really what happens here is that we expanding the story of Paddington living in modern-day London after coming from Peru in the first film, and how his family life is with the Browns. Meanwhile, a crooked former actor is trying to find the treasure his grandfather stole after killing a lady who owned it, a woman who set up the steam fair that they go to early on in the film, but he didn't find the treasure. But the lady he killed, the villain's grandfather killed, had left clues. I'm an idiot. To find the treasure, and that's what the villain of this piece is trying to do. He has to find the clues, and the clues are hidden in a book. And so he goes off to try and find these clues, but first he has to get the book, which he steals, and he is told about the book's existence by Paddington, who wants to get it for his aunt's birthday. She will be turning 100. And so he steals the book, and the police think it's Paddington, because he was at the crime scene on his way home, and then tried to chase down the thief. So he gets blamed, and is sent to jail whilst the villain is trying to find the treasure, and the Browns have to do all they can to try and catch the thief as well as prove Paddington's innocence. And along the way, Paddington is helped by some inmates, including Brendan Gleeson's character, who helped him out. And eventually Paddington is able to escape, and he and the Browns track down the thief and capture him. And the story's not really about catching the thief, because that story has been done to death, especially in children's films. The story is about how they do it, how they prove Paddington's innocence, how they go out and try to catch the thief, how Paddington is coping whilst in prison, whilst interacting with the other inmates. And he's pretty much turning the prison, fictional one, that pretty much looks like one with scrubs, into a much better place. And there is one scene about halfway towards the end of the second act, not long before the third, where there's a model of the prison, and it's a bit like the dollhouse from the first film, and then it just opens up and reveals people doing stuff inside. And I thought that was brilliant. That was a brilliant callback, and there's a lot of neat little callbacks to the first one and a couple of references. And one of my favourites is Simon Farnaby's cameo as a security guard at St Paul's Cathedral, similar to his one at the Geographers Guildhall in the first film. He was very funny in both scenes. And it's even better that the fact that he actually co-wrote this film with the film's director, Paul King. I'm not sure who co-wrote the first one with Paul King, if he wasn't the only one on that one. But if it wasn't Farnaby, then, well, he brought some sense of humour to this table, and he certainly topped it up a little bit. We also, earlier on, and also a bit later on, we see how Paddington living in Winter Gardens and in London has helped affect the communities. He gives a lady on a bicycle a lunch. He makes sure a doctor doesn't forget his keys. He interacts with this Colonel character. He stops off on the way at a newsagent's, who has a parrot, a newsagent's stall, I should say, and he helps a bin lorry man work his way around the city. And throughout the film, he helps. Early on in the film, he helps him out a bit, and when he is gone to prison, things have gone downhill for everybody, apart from Mr. Curry, the nasty one, who, when there's not a villain around in the Paddington stories, and Mr. Curry is in them, then he is the antagonist. He's the typical nasty neighbour person from the original stories, and he'll be the main antagonist if there's no villain of the film, of the story. And in the case of these films, he is not the main antagonist. He's just a nasty neighbour, not a very nice guy. Though it is funny to see Peter Capaldi doing a Cockney accent, and Capaldi is fantastic as Mr. Curry. Not as good as the Doctor, or even the Cardinal from the Musketeers, but he is brilliant as Mr. Curry. But it's what we see with the Winter Garden scenes, Paddington, how Paddington's been affecting it, how it was for the best earlier on in the film when it was a positive feeling, and then later when he's gone, things are a bit saddened and people aren't in a good mood, and then at the end, pretty much everyone besides Mr. Curry help out the Browns get to Paddington, and also the bin man gives Paddington a lift to the station. They go back to Paddington Station again, like in the first film. And yeah, also one of these neighbours is the main villain, but we'll get to him later. Also, nice little story arc going on with two of the neighbours, the Colonel and the news agent stall lady. They have kind of this romantic thing going. After Paddington cleans the Colonel's windows, he sees the lady at the newsstand and she sees him, and this kind of relationship forms not too long afterwards. And the newsagent lady had been looking for someone to love throughout the earlier on in the film. She'd probably broken up with someone or something, was just unlucky, a bit like Miss Lonely Heart in the Rear Window. She just hadn't got anyone, and then as soon as she sees someone, and that is Ben Miller's Colonel, and I think the newsagent lady is Jessica Hines. Also, her parrots pretty much know who the thief is, and that's how Mrs. Brown, played by Sally Hawkins, has a clue to the identity, as well as also when she actually speaks to the villain, played by Hugh Grant, that she is able to, she can tell that it's him as soon as he lets slip let slip about blue eyes, and she's like, but I didn't draw blue eyes, it's just a pencil sketch. And he's like, well, I coloured them in. And it's like that. That's when she realises it's not a criminal gang that's been going around causing trouble in London after the theft of the book. It's all one person, and that person is the villain, Phoenix. I can't remember, was it Phoenix Buchanan? I think that's it. Played by Hugh Grant, and he's been going around trying to find these clues in the book. And it's a great seeing him do this, as well as dressing up in all of these costumes. He's like, and doing all the funny voices. It's just funny. Hugh Grant is probably the best actor in the film, though Ben Whishaw as Paddington is a very close second. And he pretty much, whenever Hugh Grant's on screen, he steals the show. He's brilliant. When the focus is on Paddington, Whishaw is great. I do think they focus a bit too much on Paddington in this film, considering it is called Paddington 2. But considering the last film was about Paddington moving into London, it was a bit of an immigrant story, as well as the personal backstory concerning that film's villain and Paddington's family. And Paddington and his family. His Peruvian one, not the Browns, they come to the rescue though. This one, I think, whilst it does focus on the Browns trying to help Paddington quite a bit, there is quite a lot of Paddington in the prison. And whilst I was happy with Thor Ragnarok not being on that junkyard planet for less time than I thought it was going to be, I was glad about that. This time, Paddington was in the prison longer than I thought it was going to be, and I wasn't exactly thrilled about that. It was good, but it wasn't brilliant. I think they could have shortened it down a bit. A nice little reference, though, that from the first film, the hard stare, which was from the original books, and they do a scene pretty similar to the first film in this film's take on it. And also, there's this one guy at the prison who pretty much wants Paddington to get hurt, but as soon as he has a marmalade sandwich, he's pretty much on the bear's side. And even when Paddington's escaping, he's like, good luck, little bear. And there's just pretty much a little small band of prison inmates, a bit like in Porridge, the new one, and probably the old one as well. I haven't seen any of those. I know, shocking. It's in clipped. And actually, I did see one. It was pretty good. And yeah, it's a bit like the new Porridge, where there's this little gang of inmates hanging out with each other. Nice guys, don't worry. They're pretty much like that, and it's kind of fun. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The ending. Now, the last act, the third act, is pretty much where it all kicks off, because that's when Paddington is chasing down Phoenix, and the Browns are right behind him, and they're on the train, and it's pretty cool having the last act take place on 2 trains, and also this rounds out Jonathan Brown's story about wanting to be a train driver. I think I'll have to come back onto those those subplots. And we see the action on the 2 trains as Mr. Brown, Judy and Mrs. Bird go after Phoenix, whilst Mrs. Brown and Jonathan stay on the train he's driving. And there's also a character who's been popping up a few times in the film, makes a bit of an importance earlier on, that similar to a guy who was pretty much very just appeared in the first film, but that one wasn't as important. He just kept popping up. Popped up twice. This one's popped up a few times. It's the judge. And yeah, the train chase is pretty cool. We've got Paddington trying to stop Phoenix, and Phoenix and him having a bit of a chase. And then the Browns get on board, and Phoenix pretty much overpowers them, but then they escape and overpower him. And it's pretty fun. Meanwhile, Paddington is trying to escape, but he ends up going into the lake, and the Mrs. Brown and the convict fellow escapees come to his rescue, and in the end they're pardoned, and so is Paddington. Phoenix is sent to prison, and he pretty much puts on a show, Slammer Style, the BBC programme, CBBC programme, at the end, and it's pretty fun. The Brown stories, the other subplots, Mrs. Brown has just finished drawing a new illustrating new adventure stories and now wants to swim the channel to France, and her training earlier on does help when she comes back to help Paddington. Mr. Brown is going through a midlife crisis, apparently. He didn't quite get the promotion he was wanting, but other than that, his story pretty much stays the same. He shed some light on Phoenix earlier on, but that's about it. Judy has broken up with Tony from the first film and is now running a newspaper thing. And this helps out quite a bit throughout the film, but not to extreme levels. Jonathan, there's this subplot where he's been obsessed with steam trains and wanted to be a steam train driver throughout the summer, but as soon as he starts school, he pretty much tries to pretend it hasn't happened and tries to be cool, the dog, and all that. But towards the end, at the end of the film, where he takes on the train, he relishes his love for steam trains as he drives it on the way to save Paddington. And Mrs. Bird is just Mrs. Bird. She's a total lot of fun. And also, she doesn't like Phoenix because he keeps forgetting her name until the end. And then she's like, "Oh, now you remember my name." That was bad in accent, I'm so sorry. And yeah, all the Browns are great as usual. I think with some of them, their stories have improved since the first one. Mr. Brown's not changed, and neither has Mrs. Bird. I think Mrs. Brown slightly changed, as has Jonathan, and Judy is a little bit. Her subplot, of course, becomes the most helpful throughout the story, at least until the end, when Mrs. Brown and Jonathan's do. But there isn't that much of a difference between characterizations, apart from Jonathan trying to forget about being a steam train lover throughout the film until he relishes it at the end. And this is why I think the focus is too much on Paddington, for at least halfway through the film, as when the Browns are trying to help him. I think some more attention should have been on them a bit more in some points. At least maybe Judy's newspaper thing gets some sort of acceleration via a story. Mind you, one bit where that did seem to be going was the interview with Phoenix's agent, played by Joanna Lumley, and there's quite a few cameos in this film, as well as Lumley and Ben Miller and Jessica Hines. There's a few others. Can't think of any at the moment, but if you spot them, you'll know them. Some great British actors. I think one of the neighbours, I've seen him in a few things. He might be Cyril from Still Open All Hours, possibly. He looks familiar. And, of course, the whole film has a great big British, huge British cast in the lead, as it did for the last film, with the exception of Nicole Kidman, who was Australian. But, oh well, she did a great job anyway in that film, and everyone does a great job here. And I love the little opening at the start of the film where we see Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pascuso, played by Mildred Staunton and Michael Gambon, rescuing a cub and adopting him as their nephew. I'm not sure. The one thing about that I do have to bring up is that they are his aunt and uncle, but they seem to be raising him. That scene implies that they've raised him. Yeah, he's probably lived with them, but I thought that was after his parents had died or something else had happened. He just lived with them. But the scene at the start implies that they raised him. So maybe in the third film we'll see a bit earlier on in the life. At the start, maybe we'll see what happened to Paddington's real parents, and then how he got onto that log in the middle of the river, and that's how Aunt Lucy and Uncle Pascuso find him in this film. And then after that, that's when we then meet them at the start of the first film, after the bit with the explorer. But I'm not sure. However, I also love the ending where Aunt Lucy comes to London for her 100th after the adventure is over, and that's how things are considered the perfect present for her, as they can't send her the book. Now it's being used as evidence against Phoenix. One thing about that as well, the book being used as evidence, when they were they thought Paddington had done it. One thing they had forgotten to mention was that there was a book that was stolen. Paddington was accused, but there was no book on him. He didn't have the book. The thief, who later turned out to be Phoenix, escaped with the book. He didn't have it on him, but yet he was still found guilty, even though there was no book on him and no actual evidence. And that's why the police lady later says to the Browns when they say, "Oh, we think it's Phoenix Smith. We know it's Phoenix." Not Phoenix Smith, that's a YouTuber. Phoenix Buchanan, we know it's Phoenix Buchanan. And the lady's like, "Without the book, you can't prove it." So how did Paddington get the 10-year sentence without the book's proof? I think the judge was just biased, and because the judge was the guy at the hairdresser that Paddington kind of shaved a little bit off the back of. I think he was just like, "I don't care if there's no evidence, I'm sentencing him anyway because I don't like him." Logic sucks. Yeah, this film has a lack of logic. A lot more than in the first film. So it is quite, hence the stuff that happens at the prison later on in the film. But yeah, that really doesn't work. But that's about it. And I think I pretty much discussed most of this stuff. The only other thing I can talk about is how great London is portrayed. Yeah, there's it doesn't get as much of a full potential as the previous film, but we do go to quite a few of the other locations, such as the Tower of London and St Paul's Cathedral, and it is really cool looking. The Paddington films are great with showing off London and its glory. Also, the train scene later on, it does look like it's been filmed on a heritage railway because they say that they were heading on their way to Bristol, but it looks like open countryside and on double, sometimes single track line. So, but, oh well. Well, the last film had an underground station called Westbourne Grove, and that's a mixture of two other London underground stations, Westbourne Park and Ladbroke Grove. Neither of them are underground, and the underground station was underground. Yeah, you might think that's a little bit, but to be honest, about, 60% of the underground is above ground? I believe. I think it's 60%. And then probably out of the remaining 40%, at least half, maybe a little less, is subsurface. And Hammersmith City and Circle Lines serve those other two I mentioned that they used the names of for that one. So, and they are subsurface lines. In fact, those bits, they would have been above ground. Not even underground, above it, on a bridge. Certainly, I think at Ladbroke Grove, they certainly would be on a bridge. But yeah, that's it from Paddington 2. It's a great film. I am going to score it a 9 out of 10. I don't think it's perfect, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. It's just a slight improvement on the first, which is also a 9 out of 10, story-wise, but not as much. I don't think they've quite upped it up as much. They kind of increased, in fact, they probably increased more of the enjoyment rather than the story, but it's still a great story. It's a bit more fun. I'm hoping they do a third one in the near future, hopefully by 2020. We'll get to see the continuing adventures of Paddington and the Browns. By this point, I think Judy would be turning... I think she's about 16 here. So I think she'd be about an adult by now. Not by now, by the next film. And we'll be seeing how that's changing her. Maybe how life at the Browns is changing with Judy becoming an adult. And Jonathan also growing up a little bit more. As in this film, he started the same school as her. He's about early teens now. I think in the first film he was about 10. So we'll be seeing how that's spikes up life in the family. Also another thing about this film is that Mr. Curry didn't. In the previous film, Mr. Curry got a slight redemption. for his nasty attitude. Here, he didn't quite get as nasty redemption, or at least a okay, you're excused for now. We'll see what you get up to in the next one. For this one, and I think everyone's pretty much left with a bad taste with his character, because he's not really an evil person. He's just not very nice, and he didn't really do anything to help Paddington at the end of this film, as opposed to the last one when he told the Browns about the villain, Millicent. Here, he just stood in the road, tried to stop them from helping Paddington. Yep. So, yeah, we'll see how his character is portrayed next time we see him, if there is going to be another one. I do hope so. I don't want him to become a full-on. Don't want him helping Paddington as part of the main story, but maybe like, he went that way or something, like in the last film, just something like that, so he can stay as the nasty neighbour, but maybe have a redemption at the end of the film, and then next film, what's he up to this time? Or how is he going to cause trouble for Paddington this time? Or what's Paddington going to do to upset him? Something like that. Just not evil, just grumpy, not happy. Grumpy and not happy. But yeah, I kind of miss him when he's not here. I wouldn't want to see him get killed off. Guys, he went that way. Go quickly. If you still got time to rescue him. Something like that would have been great. Or would be great in the future. So that's it from Paddington 2. It was a great film. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and one more thing. Shout out to Ollie Pajak, aka Mr. Taz 11, who I saw this film at the cinema yet. He, at time of when we went, he hadn't seen the first one. Don't know if he has yet. So hopefully he's gone or going to check it out before he and then he'll review that and the second one and compare the two. So shout out to Mr. Taz 11, and yes, he liked it. He found it very enjoyable. So he'll probably give it a very positive review. This one, at least. I am sure he'll give the other one as very positive review. I did. Okay, see you. We're rich again. And it only cost £5.50. Excuse me, after lunch. Excuse me. Oh, now you remembered my name. Sorry, I'm trying it in a Scottish accent. Oh, now you'll remember. No, I'm not doing it like that. And then she's like, but with the exception of Mrs. Berg, who's as great in the first film, I think this. Oh fuck! I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. Ah, Mr. Brown, you're looking good for your age. Ah, good morning, Mr. Brown. Ah, shit. Ah, good morning, Mr. Brown. You're looking great for your age. Ah, good morning, Mr. Brown. You're looking good for your age. 80. We're rich again. And it only cost £5.50.